On this episode of Fish's Call Sheet, where we celebrate the people who make production possible, we have production coordinator, Katrina Elder.
Day 13
Almost.
of 14-day quarantine.
Are you hanging in?
Yeah, I am. You know, I'm lucky because I've been busy. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have my work. This is my first time to Australia, and I can't believe I have to come in these circumstances. It's one of those things where I've never gotten a movie here, even though they shoot lots of movies here. And in fact, there's so much going on right now in terms of competition. It's fierce. I mean, we've got the Baz Luhrmann film shooting at the same time, and then there's another Endeavour show called Nine Perfect Strangers shooting in New South Wales. And so a lot of the crew has been taken by them. There's a very tight-knit community here. It's very, they've got their crews, let's just say.
Yeah.
So it's a whole new world, right?
It's a very interesting world. I get tested between 3 and 4 times a week. Masks and gloves and zones and arrows on the floor to direct traffic, and entrances versus exits, and if I'm going to be directing. So when I'm directing, because I'm not acting, I have to wear different protective gear.
The one thing though about being in the performer zone is that whether you're directing or you're acting, you're still on that 3-4 times a week testing cadence. In terms of control measures, that's huge. We just really have to work with the crew in a way that's in alignment with both what the studio wants and also how to manage expectations and to support. Really, the job that I do is different on this job because while I am a supervisor on this job, it's not the same type of supervising. I'm not like getting cranes and making sure that my group of electric team are taken care of. It's more like I'm taking care of the whole crew and having to figure out what the needs are for every department having to do with this one thing. So it's like this filter on my whole job. It's very interesting, but at the same time, it's kind of like I can just imagine when my name and number come up on someone's phone, they're like, oh.
Yeah. She's in charge of the area, right? But the reality is it's a necessity at the current time. I know for us, it's very interesting because I spend so much time with our crew. It's the closest I can equate it to kind of being like what a lot of other actors do normally, because I'm not a guy who hides in my dressing room or is away, right? I'm so close to my crew and I spend so much time with the people I work with. So it's really hard to maintain that distance, or, I got a lot of people I've known for 30 years. I can't give anybody a hug at work. And
I know.
And I'm really not that much of a hugger out in the world, but I am at work. And so it's a very interesting dynamic.
Well, I mean, as you well know, we carnies or production folk who go from job to job, we tend to develop very close relationships with the people that we work with, because oftentimes these are the only people we know for months and months, while you work in this strange little production bubble. And so they're your family, So in terms of getting close with the people you work with, yeah, I mean, I don't go home at 5 o'clock and, check out from my job. I'm 24/7. As soon as I sign up, it's on, and I'm on the production bullet train. There's no stopping. There's no getting off.
No stopping, no getting off. If you go out to dinner, it's usually as a group to discuss something related to what you're doing. Interactions are related, and especially when you're on location or away from home, these are the people you're with from basically the moment you wake up till almost the moment you go to bed, and then you get up and do it again. And the collaborative aspect of it is the nature of trying to always solve problems, especially in your line of work, is you're always solving things. So it means you're always interacting and pushing up against a problem. And when we're doing it right, it means that we're combining in some way to overcome whatever obstacle stands in the way of this production getting made.
So really, as production people, when COVID came along and they said, okay, you can't go to work, we started saying like, well, why not? I mean, we are by nature problem solvers, as you said. And so it just became a new challenge to overcome rather than a stop to what we were doing. You know, it's interesting because in my career, you know, you know, one problem goes away and 100 come up. So there's never a time when we get to sit on our laurels. You know, I would be out of a job if there were no problems. So, you know, we were working with the Navy on a show, and I remember at one point we had a situation that was it was going to shut us down. I mean, and we were supposed to be out at sea on a carrier, and the Navy came to us and said, oh yeah, no, we can't do that. And we were like, say what? You know, so we had to pivot like that. And so in a matter of days, we were shooting something completely different. And, you know, an entire crew from elsewhere descended upon this, you know, this Navy base, and like that, we were shooting something else. And while we weren't out to sea, we figured out another way to shoot a different part of the movie and just move forward. And they, you know, I remember one of them looked at us, and he was one of the commanders, and he said, man, if the Navy worked like production did, it would just, you know, it would be a totally different story. I go back to, you know, somebody says, oh, there's a wall. I said, well, get a shovel, we're going under, or, you know, like whatever. Let's just make this happen.
Whether it be a shovel or a crane, or we're building a bridge over, or we're going to raise everything up to the height of the wall so we can shoot straight. Like, we're going to find a way over, under, around, through, whichever way. And that's the necessity of production. You know, I always say that you have to will these things into existence, because even when you have what you think is a great plan and everything's lined up, it gets in the way.
Plans, yeah.
We call those early drafts, right?
Work in progress. I mean, I laugh at. I get a schedule, and I always think to myself, like, yeah, okay, whatever, right, sure.
Yeah.
This is one idea. There was a film I was working on, and I was joking around with the camera person, because I would always give him this sort of, you know, so the schedule's coming up, but what's really happening is, you know, we were joking around, and I said to him, I said, I've never worked on a project where the script is a bigger fiction than the actual movie is, you know. The script, I meant the schedule, that the schedule is a bigger script than the movie is. And I feel like the fiction that we're creating is oftentimes like the only thing that we can count on is the story that we're creating, and then everything else we'll see. We'll see when we get there.
How we get there, you know, it's so interesting too, because even at the end you go, okay, we're gonna have to get rid of that scene, and we're gonna reshape this, and we're gonna move these things over here, and then we'll just have to do it that way. Because even when you think you're done, you're not done.
Best directors that I have worked with are those who are editing the movie while they're shooting it. So they're thinking so many steps ahead, and you have to. There's no such thing as, you know, you're just working on the production part. All we're doing is teeing it up for post-production. And then, you know, a lot of people believe that's where the movie is made, is in post-production. And to a large extent, particularly when you're working on these big visual effects movies, you're just teeing it up for another year-long process for a huge visual effects team who's just going to take every frame and rethink it. You know, you said collaborative process. It absolutely is. And from day one, you're thinking about, well, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about, what are they seeing when they're in the theater? I do like to say theater, but I know that so much of it is streaming, especially now when we can't go to the theater. I loved going to the movies when I was a kid, and I still love going to the movies.
Is that what kind of prompted you to come this direction? Is the love?
Oh, God, yes. When I was a kid, I would take the TV guide, and because we had TV guides when I was a kid, we get it in a Sunday paper, and I would get a highlighter, and I would just highlight all the various shows that I wanted to watch during the week. And I was committed, man. I punched in and punched out in front of television every day. And I was lucky because I didn't have a parent who was, or a mother or father who was limiting my screen time. They were like, whatever, the boob tube was a babysitter. And, 6 kids in the family, the biggest fight was who's going to get their way in terms of the television channel. I also remember doing my homework in front of the TV, and there was just no limits. A sick day was like, yes, then I get to watch cartoons in the morning, and then, full on. And then as I got older, my interest moved into film because, you have to remember as well, like the evolution of cable television happened when I was a kid. And I remember MTV. I mean, I remember like that flag being planted on the moon and being like, MTV, it was the end all be all. And then, when we had HBO, it was like a set top box. And watching the evolution of beta and VHS and DVD and now streaming, and really seeing how that's affected the business and how it's affected the business that I'm in, delivery dates, how the filmmakers are thinking about the aspect ratio, what we're shooting it in terms of the definition. Certain studios require a certain definition, and you have to respect that. If you have to think about your deliverables before you buy but rent your camera package and your lenses and everything else. Frame rate and how it's going to translate in the international market, and particularly with feature films where you're not making a movie just for the North American market. You're making a movie for Asia Pacific and South America and, Europe, of course. But, when you have a budget that's like $250 million, and then there's marketing costs on top of that, you have to think, okay, who, first of all, is going to put the butts in the seats? What does that mean? And how does the story translate? Because the jokes of a comedy are not necessarily going to translate in an audience that doesn't quite doesn't quite understand the nuance of American culture. So that's why you look at these movies and you see like, oh, that's why we're doing all these, Marvel movies and, these, comic books come to life because they're very visually easy to translate into many, many different languages and cultures. I've seen the face of filmmaking change, and I miss the smaller movies. I miss, I worked on a movie called Marriage Story, and it was such a great experience. I remember looking at the script and thinking like, I don't know if I really get it. But when I saw the final product and I saw like it happening as we were watching the actors work on a daily basis, and you just saw the story come off the page. And I love those kind of movies. I actually, when I first got into it, I was an actress, and I worked commercially and theatrically. And I've always loved the process of, when the actor looks at the words on the page and then brings them to life. But I understand from a filmmaker's point of view what that means. An actor delivers a performance, and then an editor creates the story, and a director works in both, ends. The collaboration just between those three players, or those three elements, if you will, is so important. I've seen entire performances created in the editing room. Not kidding. There was a director that I worked with, David Fincher, who he would cut syllable by syllable. I'm not saying frame by frame. I'm saying syllable by syllable. And, I was working with Rosamund Pike on that movie, and she's a British actress, and she played an American, and she played an American with multiple accents. And so she, she worked very closely with a dialect coach and created a character, not just from Louisiana, but like a specific place in Louisiana. Then when they got into the cutting room, I thought for sure there was going to be tons of ADR, additional dialogue replacement, for those who don't know what that means. But there really wasn't. He said that, oh no, we've got it. If it's not on that take, it's on another. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. You know, he's a fascinating filmmaker. And boy, from a actor's point of view, he does hard. A lot of takes.
It's a challenge because everybody has their own style of working.
It is interesting, and sometimes from the sidelines, it's the best film school ever. Because when cable television came into my world, I was like, oh, movies, you know? And I remember watching Top Gun on cable probably, like a million times. Wall Street, I mean, I remember watching Wall Street and seeing it over and over. I wore that VHS tape out, and I thought I wanted to be work on Wall Street because of that movie. I really did. And then later when I started to think about it, I thought, oh, you know, what I really wanted to do was make movies. It was, as an actress, I was working in Chicago, and I was on a commercial, and this director, he and I were just standing there on set during, you know, when second team is there and they're setting up. And I was just looking around, and I was like, you know, what is all this stuff? And I was like pointing at the camera dolly and the dolly track, and, you know, and he said, oh, well, you know, and he explained it to me. He explained why they used the camera dolly and why they had to put it on a track and why they had to, you know, put all those little wood blocks underneath it, and, and, you know, what the crane was for, and what the, you know, the mount on top of the crane, it's like a remote head for the camera. And I was just fascinated, you know, and I thought, God, this must cost so much money. And it does, man. I see those numbers now, and it's expensive. It was fascinating to me. And he said, you know, if you're interested in all this stuff, there's this really great film school in town. And I was at that point where I had quit school, and I was like, or university anyway. And I was like, I can't take another econ class. I can't take another like math class or English class. And I did really well in school. I was, you know, I graduated early from high school, and I was very academically accelerated and all of that. When I got to university, I was like, I'm so bored. And so when he said film school, I lit up. I was like, oh, I took film appreciation once. That was really interesting. So I thought, to learn how to make movies, what does that mean? And so I went to Columbia College in Chicago, and on day one, they put a camera in your hand. It's a Bolex, and you wind it up, but it's a 16mm camera, and we went out and shot movies. I worked in the film cage where people would come to, you know, rent out their equipment. So I always had access to equipment, and we would take short ends, and we would just go out and shoot stuff. And the lab that we worked with would process our short ends for like really cheap. And we had editing equipment. And so we would edit on flatbeds and literally splice the film with a razor blade and tape it together. And I mean, I remember, like, you know, looking at my new viola.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then, you know, eventually learning Avid and Final Cut and that type of thing. But I didn't study editing. It was very natural for me to go towards production, because I was always the person on set that was telling people what to do and telling people how we were going to schedule the movie to make it the most efficient. And so I often during film school was asked to be production manager or the first AD, or, you know, something to do with the organizational aspect of the process. Because you can't just turn up with a camera and start shooting. There's a lot of preparation that you have to do. And they'll kick you out if you turn up and just start shooting, particularly in Los Angeles, where people are savvy. They're not so, you know, crazy about you turning up with like 30 trucks without a permit.
They're pretty keen in LA, because they'll see two people get out and start looking around, and it's like they already have on speed dial just waiting for you to break the camera out. They're like, oh, these people are going to try and film something real fast.
Oh, yeah. They'll shut you down. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of considerations that go into the process. And like I said, it was a very natural evolution for me to go from acting to production. Not to, you know, poo-poo what you do, but it just wasn't my bag, man. Because it wasn't on my mind anymore. Once I got into the film thing, I just kind of was like, see ya acting, because so much of acting is auditioning, and I hated auditioning.
Which is
Ugh,
a totally
I
different
hated it.
skill. And we've all
Yeah.
worked with people who are amazing auditioners, and then you get them on set, and it's a really big struggle. And that's
Oh
one of the
yeah.
hardest things is there are people who are in anything. There are people who are good at certain skills, and to be good at all
Oh
of it
yeah.
is a totally different thing. And I've watched some of the most amazing actors I've ever seen not be able to audition and be very uncomfortable, or it can be a really tough process for a lot of people.
Painful.
That was never my favorite part. I always was like, okay, yeah, I can go in the room and I'm good, but I'm a worker. I'm a show up every day. Okay, let's try something new. Hey, we're going to get 2 shots at this because we got about 12 minutes and about 10
The
minutes of
light is
light.
going to be,
Yep.
you know.
And you're going to either make this happen in the next 3 seconds to make this shot go, and then we have 5 minutes to make this work, or it's not happening and it's not going to be there, and we have a major problem with this project, and I'm in. I like that moment of truth, but it's not the same for everyone. And I was like you, I spent time on set and was mesmerized and amazed and fell in love with all of the departments. And that's kind of where this show comes from, is realizing the talent and the amazing skill that goes into every department and every group and the coordination. When we do this right, not only is it an art form, but it is the most beautiful collaboration of truly unique people.
Oh yeah, and from all walks of life.
Yes.
You look at a film set, and you know, one time somebody asked me, what's the difference between above the line and below the line? And I said, oh, well, if you're below the line, you could get killed on the job. I mean, like,
yes.
I mean, look, that's an oversimplification, we know, but you know, it's people from all walks of life and all different educational levels, creative levels, political points of view. I mean, everything, you name it. I'm telling you, there's somebody on set that represents that thing. You know, one thing regarding representation, in fact, coming into my job, I was shocked at like how it was like women do this and men do that, even in the film business. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't accept that.
Right.
You know, I was told in film school that if I wanted to make it as a producer, that I should marry well. Yeah, I was like, wow. I graduated in 1997.
Right. It's not, and the scariest part is it's not that long ago that was kind of a standard thing to tell people, because I mean, neither of us are that old, and to know that we've known people who thought that was the only way, or that people worked places where people have said things like that. I mean, I grew up in a unique environment because we were such a mix and such a kind of outlier that we attracted outliers. But it's funny, you know, I grew up through the AIDS epidemic in the late 80s and early 90s. Other people were reading about these things. These were things we were experiencing. Gender conformity was not the same on set as it was out in the world. And, you know, we were promoting so many women to positions of authority and power. And it was not just mind-blowing to watch some of the people who pushed back against that. It was amazing to watch the people in the sets around us who became uncomfortable with the progress that was occurring. As a kid, it's a really interesting thing because I was watching literally the concept of inclusion grow on set, you know, as a child, and going, why is that an issue? They're great at their job. And then all of a sudden you listen to other sets or you go visit other sets, you're like, wow, this is 90% male and there's very little diversity here. There's only certain roles that females were allowed to hold on certain sets, or, you know, you had female producers who didn't get a voice or a vote. And you're like, well, she's here.
Meanwhile, they created the show.
Right. And it was mind blowing for me, but it shows how far we've come, but sadly how far we still have to go. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those things for me. Like for me as someone who writes, produces, and directs and wants to build these projects, so many of my projects are minority leads or female-led, female-dominated stories, the fact that sometimes when I go to a meeting to pitch a show or a movie, that they're like, well, what if we change the main character to male? I'm like, you have to expand your thought process. Or all those people can't be friends. I'm like, have you been to one of your productions? Because I'm pretty sure that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
And
Tina Fey actually has a really good comment about that, becoming the head writer of SNL, and how she had been pitching a skit for like ever. It was years and years that this skit was pitched. And finally, when she was the head writer, she said, yeah, let's do it. And everybody in the room kind of groaned, because it was like something to do with like, I don't know, period commercial, like, you know, pads or something. It was like a joke. And because everybody else in the room who was a man didn't get it. They didn't like get the joke. And Tina was like, it's funny. And they're like, is that really funny? And like every woman in the room was like, yeah, it's funny, you know? And, you know, just some silly little thing like that, where it literally takes a woman in the room to get that it's funny, and that it's funny to 51% of their audience.
This is the thing, whether it be gender or even race at this point, is I'm always like, it doesn't just apply to that group. Every guy on the planet had a mom. Every guy on the planet has been around other women in his life, whether it be a sister, an aunt, a cousin, obviously a romantic partner, if that's their orientation. Like, you've been around, like, it doesn't just apply to the one group. On Roseanne, we did an episode about the girls getting their period, and that was a monumental fight.
I remember it.
And the network was concerned, and there were lots of people who were like, well, you can't do that, you can't make jokes about it. And, you know, we got this whole list. It was like literally probably a day and a half of like all the words you couldn't say.
The
and
studio notes.
And you laugh because you go, and now, you know, now coming back to television, some of the things that we can say on a weekly basis, I'm always like, oh yeah, we can say that now, because
you're like, oh, I'm such a prude. You're like, clutching your pearls.
Well, I did like, and I think it still carries in my writing, is I have definitely not a prude, but I think you have to be sneaky about how you say things. And I think that's some of the game that used to be really fun that we're losing a little bit as we open up the language.
Right. Well, you know, it's interesting though. And again, it's so weird that this just came up recently. I feel like we took a lot of strides forward, and then we're kind of like really cagey right now about what we can or can't say. In comedy in particular, it's really tricky because you have so many comics who came up and just pushed doors down, knocked it really, and pushed the boundaries on like things they said, and so much of it was controversial beyond. And you think, oh, you know, you think of like even Roseanne, or you think about, you know, Richard Pryor, or, you know, Eddie Murphy, like Bill Barr right now, or, you know, so many comedians who just push and push and push. And they said, you know, I just want to say whatever I'm going to say. And then to hell with it. Either I get a laugh or I don't get a laugh. That's the result we're going for. And of course, you know, you have the studio who their result is, we want to keep our advertisers. You know, they have a different audience. They're not making television shows for the audience per se. They're making it for their advertisers. And it's a real shift in like what they have to think about in terms of how they're going to keep operating, because ultimately somebody's got to pay for it, right? So, you know, it's a totally different perspective that they're coming from. In terms of what their audience wants, they might be more progressive or more desirous of, you know, like you said, you know, hearing those types of they're listening to shows about that particular subject matter that interests them on a daily basis. But the advertisers say like, ooh, you know, but we don't want to offend this group, and then we don't want to offend that group. And it's suddenly like this whole like game of like finding where the weird sort of milquetoast middle is. And suddenly it's like, ugh, there goes the story. There goes the fun.
It's hard when you're writing. And Dave Chappelle, I would say, to me right now, is kind of on the cutting edge.
Love him.
Because he's so brilliant, and
so brilliant.
There's this element with him where it's almost like George Carlin-esque thing, is he's saying things that have so many multiple layers, and he's saying things that people don't want to hear, but he
doesn't have anything to lose.
Yeah, but he's doing them in a, well, it's funny, in some ways he has everything to lose and he doesn't care, right? Which is the most freeing.
He already lost it.
Right. But well, actually, he gave it up.
Away from $1 billion.
Right. And it's amazing because there's such a power in that, and audiences are clamoring to hear it. But on the flip side, for a network or some kind of larger entity, you're at so much greater risk.
You know, Paramount is owned by Viacom. You know what I mean? Like, all the studios have their corporate overlords.
Right.
So,
and the system is that way now, and you're tied to major global conglomerates. You just never know which hand is totally in charge at certain times, and it's a really interesting dynamic because it definitely changes the way we shape projects and production.
Oh yeah, even very recently, think about Tropic Thunder. Think about the jokes in that movie.
Oh no, I don't think you could make that movie.
No,
I was shocked.
Never make it.
I was shocked that movie got made, and I was really shocked that people still regard it well, because of how far we've shifted, right? Because the nature of the shift.
Well, okay, there's two, it's interesting because we could go down a line here, but when you look at a film and you think about the historical context of the film, I brought up Wall Street a minute ago. I mean, think about the historical context of that movie. One of the themes of that movie was greed is good.
Yep.
That is like 80s to the max, right?
Yes, make as much money as you can. However, however you do it, there really are no rules, and this is empowering.
He doesn't sleep. Then, cut to 2008 when Wall Street fell apart. I was living in New York when that happened. And I remember my roommate at the time, we were living in Brooklyn, and he was like, "You're going to need to get some MREs." I was like, "What the hell is an MRE?" He's like, "Meals ready to eat, girl. And water too. We got to store that shit up." I was like, "Are you insane?" He's like, "I'm telling you, it's going to be civil unrest." I thought, holy crap, like this guy's insane. But there I was at, Trader Joe's, like getting my canned soup and like really prepping for the end. And it was very strange that time in New York with Wall Street sort of collapsing and then the Fed like bailing them out. And, then there's this shift from like the Bush era to to Obama, and, what did that all mean? And then, and then the sort of, geopolitical, and remember the writer's strike happened that year too.
Yeah.
And it was in large part when the writer's strike happened, I was like, I'm done. I hung it up. I was like, production, it's a grind as it is. The business came to a screeching halt, and suddenly it was reality television stepping in. Yep. I thought, I am not doing that. And so I, like I said, I hung it up and I moved to New York and I got out of the business. I've gotten out of the business so many times and gotten sucked back in. But you're never going to get out.
You never, well, there's the part of you're never going to get out, but you don't want to get out, right? Like there's an element of, it's production.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, well, production is a love-hate thing, especially as a production coordinator. People, everybody thinks they have an idea of what your job is.
Nobody knows what my job is.
No.
My job isn't defined.
Right. So what do people think you do?
I make sure the call sheet gets out every night.
Okay. And what do you really do?
What do people think I do? People think I do whatever it is they want me to do.
Whatever they need you for, right?
Yeah. So much of my job is about putting out the daily fires. But what I really do is I work very closely with the studio and the production manager to make sure that the movie is not only compliant, but also that we can deliver it. And at the end of the day, I wrap it up into a little bow and I hand it to the studio and I say, there you go. Because I have to take the mess and distill it into this hard drive, literally, and say, this is where all the bodies are buried. And then
make something.
and I'm not delivering creative stuff. I'm delivering the paperwork. I'm delivering, okay, so I said compliance. What that means is the studio, like we said, answers to the government, the local government. They answer to the federal government. They answer to the corporation. They answer to the insurance companies. They answer to SAG, IATSE, DGA, and whatever other guild.
Every other guild, and each area has their own guild and departments, and they all have a voice and a statement to be made. Their own.
I'm part of a union
and laws.
2 unions.
Yeah, me too. And I don't even know how many at this point.
Were you ever part of IATSE when you were working on set?
No. Well, so I went to go into the electrical. So I have the most bizarre path because I started SAG. Well, I started after it. Then I got to SAG. Then I started doing some individual stuff that was under another union that doesn't exist anymore. And then I went behind the camera. And so I've been through pretty much every realm on that side. And then I'm going back to like Writers Guild, Directors Guild, all that stuff, and kind of re-establishing all of that. But at one point, I've worked props, set decoration, production design, electric, grips, camera operator. Like I was lucky, and every time I moved out of this, I was construction coordinator and built sets. You know, like all these things I've done. My Emmy nomination is for production design on a sports show. Like, oh wow. The crew of guys I took after working at that job, going back to the above the line, below the line that people used to talk about, I kind of shatter the line. So I've never really fit under those categories. But the crew that I ran, I was the only guy who didn't have a felony record. And we were a tough, motley crew, but the hardest working, most talented people I've ever seen. I had a welder who could make anything. We had fabricators, and you find the most amazing people in this business. And they do things that are beyond artistic and beyond explanation. And they'll turn to you and say, well, we could do this. And then you almost have to turn to whoever the union person is, whoever else is in charge, and say, you okay if we do that? Because that sounds like a really good idea. That would be amazing. And then we probably turn to you and say, we're going to get some approval for this.
Well, yeah. Okay. So that's a really good example, because my mind, as soon as somebody says, oh, we're going to do something dangerous, I don't ever think to myself, oh, no, we're not. I think to myself, okay, so how are we going to do it? Well, how are we going to do it? We're going to come up with a plan. And we are going to have the best safety people, and we're going to have probably a billion meetings about it. And it is going to be airtight. And we're going to make sure we rehearse it. We're going to make sure we pre-visit. We're going to make sure that we have the minimal amount of people on set during the explosion or the thing or the whatever. And we're going to make sure that we maximize the amount of time and energy spent, so that we are constantly, because those dangerous things that you do, they also cost money, I think of, like, I worked with Michael Bay, and he produced a movie that I worked on, and he also directed and produced a movie that I worked on. And Michael is a person that has big ideas. Like you just get them done, and he works with these amazing special effects people, amazing visual artists. When you work on a movie like that, where it's, so much of it, you don't even see it while you're doing it. And then, later you see what they did with it, and you're so excited. It's so fascinating. In terms of safety, the studio says, okay, well, yeah, we have to mitigate risk. And that's where, I come in. So I am, dealing with all the risk mitigation and the, making sure that everything is insured, and making sure that we are, like I said, compliant, that we're doing the safety meetings, that we're talking about safety, that we have the plan, that we submit. Like, even when you're shooting with drones, for instance, we have to make sure that we're answering to the FAA, make sure we're insured, make sure that all the people are properly licensed. And I do all that. When they say to me, oh, hey, we're going to have a Marine unit, and we're going to be, there's going to be the actual picture boat, then there's going to be the camera boat, there's going to be all the support boats, we have to have a green room boat, and also we have to have a dock, we're also going to have a drone that day. And I mean, it's just everything. So not only do you have all the equipment that's on top of these toys, but you then have all of the toys, like say on water, or a drone in the sky. There's just all these different elements that you have to think about. And you have to make sure that at the end of the day, if anything happens, that we're covered and that we have the right people there. Everything from a standby ambulance to a medic on the boat and a medic on the ground, Right.
I used to work as a rescue diver, and I worked productions where I was the guy in the water.
What haven't you done,
I've
man?
done a lot of stuff. This is what happens when you start young, get married young, have kids, and have to work a lot of things to make it all work. And you're a creative person who didn't want to get the standard 9 to 5 and did that for a while and realized that was not going to work. Everybody has to check their boxes, and then they all come to you and say, okay, we think we checked some of our boxes, and you have to go through and make sure not only were those boxes checked, but all the ones that none of them realized or planned for have to be coordinated too. And then you come up with these massive plans, and then we shoot 30 seconds, right? And then we got to move on to the next setup, and we got to do it all again. And I don't think people realize just the scope. You said we're carnies. It's a moving civilization all the time. People joke about going to Burning Man. I'm like, that's pretty much kind of in a way what we do, only with a few more guidelines and
less drugs.
Less drugs, right? Like we show up in the middle of a place. We build a world. We make sure the world works. Sometimes we blow it up. Other times we take it down. Then we reshape all of the area. And then a lot of times we have to put it back close to the way we found it or better.
Yeah. You never want to burn a location. And I mean, I don't mean that, I mean that in a figurative way.
Right.
Because sometimes we do burn it down, and then we have to replant the trees and make sure that it looks the way it did when we arrived. And if not that way, better. Yeah, I mean, no kidding. We built a house. One of the first location job, no, I guess the second location job I had, we went to South Carolina, and we shot a movie called The Patriot. This is back in like 98, I want to say 99 maybe. And we built a house, and it was this big, beautiful Southern house with this wraparound porch. And I mean, not every room was tricked out inside of it, but wherever we were shooting was. But it was just this gorgeous house. The last day of shooting, we burnt it down, and it was magnificent. It was a multiple camera day, and it was just massive. And so we had all this footage, and we shot that movie on film. In fact, we shot that movie on film, but we did digital dailies. And that was such a fight with the studio, just moving into this whole tech world. I mean, we really we used email back then, but we didn't use it like we use it now. I mean, we still were sending the call sheet out via fax back then. And, script changes, you would print off all the script changes, and there'd be 100 different colors in the script. And, but anyway, so we burned down this house with all this footage. And my job, a part of my job back then, was to ship all of the raw footage to the lab in LA. And then the lab would process the dailies, and then they'd put the dailies on a drive, because remember, they're digital dailies. And then they would ship the digital dailies back to the editorial. And this particular time, they're like, we can't just, this is really special footage. Like, we can't shoot this again. The house is burnt down. There's no more house to build and reburn. So they put a PA on the plane with the footage, and then that person flew to LA. They delivered the footage, and then they spent one night in the, I think, Universal Hilton or whatever, right. And then got on a plane and flew back to South Carolina the next day. It's just silly little things that we do. We do that kind of crap all the time. But God, I had to ship in these Great Danes for that movie back and forth so many times. Like, I can't tell you, I have so many stories of weird things I had to do. Once I had a director tell me to go find like 7,000 golf tees in different colors. I was like, what in the hell for? I mean, honestly, I can't ask why. I just say, okay, and I do it. You know, whatever they ask me to do, I do it.
All right, give us a couple more examples. People don't understand. Production, you get asked for things that you would never get asked for in any other realm.
I mean, there are some things like I can't talk about.
Okay. Yeah, there's always some of those.
I mean, those are the things that come up first in my mind.
Right.
I'm like, oh yeah, no, you can't say that. You can't say that. You're being recorded. Like I said, I know where the bodies are buried a lot. I mean, I get called about every silly little problem, you know, everything from, you know, we stay in a lot of hotels, you know, everybody has their little perks that they have to have while they're in a hotel. And, you know, certain arrangements of rooms and certain, you know, security levels, and also trying to keep it as secret as possible when you have a high level person staying in a hotel. It's everything. I can't, there's so many things I don't even think of anything as, I don't think of anything as abnormal anymore.
No,
I really don't.
Well, that's the thing I try to explain to people is our days are abnormal. Every day is abnormal. Every project is abnormal because there isn't really truly a norm in our business because every production is different. And the cast of characters, don't mean on screen, I mean in general, is different.
Behind the camera.
Yeah. And you never know. I've worked in a movie where we had to rent out an entire hotel. I worked in a movie where they rented out everything but the bottom 2 floors because they wanted the hotel to pretend like it was open normally. And then the other 4 floors were all us, but the top floor was only actors, but 2 actors had to be on one end by themselves, and then everybody else was on the other, right? Like, then you just go,
oh yeah,
okay,
yeah,
whatever comes with this territory this time, right?
I mean, I've done everything from chase off paparazzi to you know, to just deliveries in the middle of the night. Bailing people out of jail.
I was the guy who used to go pick up my coworkers when I was 16 years old at 2 a.m. from places I was not allowed in, you know, and then I would take them home and their spouse would be standing on the porch and the spouse would be like, they're not coming in.
Yeah.
Take them someplace else, Fish. Take them wherever you want. And I'm like, I'm 16 years old. Like, I wasn't even supposed to be involved in this to begin with. Like,
I curfew.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't want to be the adult in this situation. Where am I supposed to take them? Like, okay.
I know. Oh yeah. Speaking of adults, I mean, we joke around about location. You know, that it's recess for adults, or you know, when people start to like hook up when they're on location, we say, oh no, that's not a relationship. That's a locationship.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes, there's a lot of those. Everybody gets pushed together so tightly and you work so closely together. You meet people and then you won't work together again sometimes for 5, 10, 15 years.
As I've kind of come up in the business as well, you know, some of I mean, we joke, we say old timers, you know, but, you know, people who've got longevity in the business and they have lots of years of experience, and you just respect the hell out of them that they've lasted as long as they have, because I said I'd burned out a couple of times. You know, I tried to get out and I fell back in, and here I am. One time I saw this guy, he's a locations manager, and we worked on a small film in LA. And then I was working with him I worked on Top Gun for a couple of years, 2 movies ago. The first day I saw him, I was like, oh yes, you're on this movie. And I was so excited about it. And he looked at me and he was like, did you shrink? I was like, oh, well, I'm glad that I stand so large in your mind. He was like, no, I think you actually shrunk. I was like, yeah, well, a couple of years in this business will do it to you.
And you left and you came back. What motivates you? What makes you undertake this responsibility, project in, project out?
I think I'm maybe a little certifiable. I think I love the pace, you know. There's never a dull moment. I said, I'm sitting here in quarantine and 13 days have flown by because I am busy. I am on the prep bullet train right now. And, and I'm directing things from afar. First I was in LA at, 17 hours time difference. And now I'm here and now I have to deal with LA, this kind of forward moving, constantly, chugging along. It's busy. It's just, and I think I love that. I'm drawn to it. I'm drawn to the problem solving. I am a natural problem solver. I go toward the problem. I'm not afraid of it, and I look at those opportunities as opportunities to shine. And so there is, of course we all do it for the glory, but I don't do it, a lot of people back home, they see the credit at the end of the movie and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you worked on them. And I saw your name and it's like, oh, like, did I get a credit in that? I didn't even see, I didn't even wait to the credits. Like, I have no idea.
And they're years ago. That's the hard part, I think, too, for people, especially when you're doing movies, is that could be 2 years ago. It could be 2 projects ago.
Oh yeah.
And you're so you're so built on today and the next thing. If you could go back, right, knowing what you know now, are there projects that you would go back to or do something different?
Oh, I still wake up in the middle of the night going like, oh, I forgot to do that thing. I have these lists of I don't have the advantage that people at certain levels have of being able to choose my projects. My projects choose me. The phone rings and I answer it and then I say yes or no based on my availability. Hopefully you work hard, people see you work hard, they see that you deliver, and then they want to keep working with you. So you end up having sort of a thread of people that you work with. It's not always the same group, but I don't get I don't get to choose per se, other than to pick up the phone and say yes.
I think it's interesting. People outside of our business most people don't work in a field where your last project could be your last project, right? And so we're constantly
right.
in this mode of you have to make the next thing. And in some ways, the last thing matters from the standpoint of trying to make it great because it helps opportunity for the next one. And you make these connections and these through lines. How do you bridge that gap and know that no matter how great you do on this project, the project has a expiration date, essentially?
Mm-hmm. My relationships are with the production managers, the line producers, and the studio. So physical production at the studio. I get calls. I feel like I've been working for Paramount. I worked for them year after year after year. And now I'm doing my second Netflix movie. And this, but maybe other people that might be watching this don't, is that sometimes you start a job and you're in the really early prep time and you're not officially greenlit yet. And you're sort of moving out of the development phase and into the prep of the actual shoot, the physical production portion. And so you're operating in this strange nebulous land where you're answering to the studio still and not sort of the production manager, but really so much of in the early stages, I'm answering to the studio. There is this feeling constantly like, you could just get shut down at any moment. Like they might not greenlight you, particularly when you're working on these huge budget movies where they have to be sure that the casting is right and be sure that the package is right. And so you just go to work every day and you just hope that the next day isn't your last. So in this weird nebulous world, there's this constant feeling of it could go away tomorrow, And so the studio's like, yeah, but you'll still come and work for us. And man, that just, that makes me feel good. And I'll tell you, even on this movie, we couldn't figure out what location we were going to shoot in. And there's so many factors that go into it. Everything from tax incentives to casting decisions to coronavirus. I got a call to work on a Martin Scorsese movie. And I cannot believe I did this, but I said no to it. I don't say no very often, but from a production standpoint, they were going to go shoot it in this really remote location. And I thought, that sounds like a nightmare. Like, I just, from a production standpoint, like, what is the availability of the hotels? Like, where do you find the people to work for you? You have to bring everything in. Guess whose job that is?
Yeah.
This girl.
And you got to make it work. And people are all going to have issues because it's difficult.
They're Hollywood people, and they're terrible, and they're difficult.
In a good situation, right? So it's hard when you go out to the middle of nowhere, or
you can be at the Four Seasons and they're still complaining. Like,
nobody walks in to wherever your office is because you don't have a set office. Nobody walks into your space or calls you or emails you because they think everything's great and they just want to send you a nice note. Like, everyone thinks their emergency is the emergency, because every department feels like, because for them it's their livelihood, it's their life, it's their portion. But you get all of those at the same time on top of each other. I guess what I really should be asking you is, how do you manage stress? How do you balance your life?
I think that I eat stress for breakfast. I mean, it's what fuels me. I don't think that if you don't like stress, you're not in this business.
I know people joke with me. They're like, how do you do what you do every day between all the different jobs and things that I've done over the years? And I'm like, man, I was trained for this. This is relatively simple, because at least most of the time I have a pretty good idea of either what we're supposed to do or where the shortcoming is and what we have to overcome.
I mean, how do I manage stress? Just power through. There's always an end. It's everything, this too shall pass. I have, in moments of massive stress, I just think to myself, you know what? There's going to be a time when we look back and we will have done this.
For every movie that's on your IMDb, for example, right? Somebody can look down your film credits. For every one of those, there's at least 3 or 4 stories probably where that production almost didn't happen. And there was a day where the sky was falling and everyone wanted to know where we were all running to. And then there was the day where people called you to ask you how you were putting it back together. Hey, Katrina, how are we going to make this work? There was a moment probably in every single one of those where whoever the parent company or whoever was writing the check, we have a problem, or we need to adjust this, right? Because it's usually, there's always
usually it's like, we're shutting you down.
Yeah.
Or no.
Yeah.
No, you will not have those actors jump off that building.
Right. It's like, right? Like, they're not jumping off, right? It's always like almost the Ferris Bueller.
Well, it's thing. Never, okay, look, it's never a secret. Like, we can't keep secrets because
you have to be covered.
Hello.
Right. There's video.
There's never, you can't, and we have the biggest mouths anyway. Like, I mean, look, we have everybody sign NDAs, but you can't have the public sign an NDA.
And you can't go anywhere where people don't exist. I have a friend who worked on a movie in the middle of the jungle. And he said somebody took video and posted it online. And he goes, they came after all of us on the crew. He goes, and then when they figured it out, they did like this little investigation. They found out it was some guy from a small town miles away who came on a motorcycle and videotaped it because it was the only thing going on in that part of the world at that time.
Oh yeah.
You can't stop it.
Marketing in the studio and how they want the film to be perceived from beginning to end, it's all this incredible plan of theirs. So you want to make sure that you're supporting their plan and that you just enough leaks out so people know to get excited, but not too much because you don't want them to know the whole story. Okay, so we had to go to San Diego and shoot 3 days of Top Gun at the beginning of, in May of 2018. And it was, you know, due to various extraneous circumstances. You know, when you're prepping a Tom Cruise movie, I don't care if you're shooting 3 days or 300 days, it is still a Tom Cruise movie, you know? And Tom is very recognizable. He can't go anywhere in the world without being recognized. And so to try and keep that a secret, I mean, come on. And he's in San Diego on a Navy base? Like, what else could it be?
Right.
And so the studio was trying so hard to keep it secret. And we had really good partners at the hotel in which we were staying, and they were very supportive of our security plan. We never called him by his name. We just kept saying, like, oh, you know, when people would ask, who is it? Who is it? I'd be like, you know, like just playing dumb. And then we got there, and Tom was on his motorcycle, and he was just tearing down a runway. And an F-18 is like, you know, it's just beautiful. And the sunset is gorgeous, and it's San Diego and Navy and whoosh, just perfect. And next thing you know, on Tom's Instagram, you know, it got announced. It's because we couldn't keep the lid on it. And TMZ was there, and they were leaking it, and, you know, everybody was trying to get a piece of it. And then finally, Tom and the studio were like, we just have to control this by announcing it. And they did. And it was so exciting. It was like, I finally got to tell my family what I was working on. And they were like, what? I mean, mind's blown. Top Gun, you know? And it was, and of course the question, is Val Kilmer going to be in it? Is, you know, who's going to be in it? Who's going to be in it? And I said, that's it. You get to know what the studio released. That's all I'm telling. And, you know, even for me, it's exciting to be able to keep that secret from my family, because they too are part of the movie going public, and they get excited when I tell them, oh, I'm working on the Matrix. They're like, what? Like, mind blown. It's fun. It's fun too. You said, why do we do it? Because it's fun. You forget about the pain. You know, it's like childbirth. You just forget.
And then it's out and it exists and it has a life of its own, and you enjoy, you know.
I mean, the stories. Oh my God. I wouldn't tell you this if they didn't include it in one of the teaser trailers, but we were on the Navy base up in China Lake in California. And the construction had built a guard shack, if you will. And the idea was that character pulls up, and that's kind of like the intro to this really sort of steely character that Ed plays. The guard shack does what a guard does, and announces them, and he's there to, like, you know, be the stern, you know, colonel or whatever the hell he is. The gag was that this plane was just going to go like that and just pop up like out of nowhere. Oh my God, it was brilliant. And we had this incredibly talented Navy pilot who did this work for us. And the plane is just coming like this, like F-18, just beautiful, just right at the last minute, like that. And the roof got blown off this little guard shack. And you see, like, the air just move and the, like, sound waves just, right? And Ed just stands there like nothing, like a statue. And everybody around him, like, hit the deck, behind the camera, on the camera. It was insane. He didn't move. He is brilliant, and it is such a good shot. And we didn't mean for that roof to get blown off, but it's an F-18, man. I mean,
happy accidents.
Insane.
Yeah,
it was so great. It was so great. And God, Ed, he is such a talented actor and just a wonderful person. I've worked with him twice, and he is just brilliant. He's brilliant. So, man, he couldn't have done it any better. One take.
Who are some of the other people who really stick out to you, where you're like, oh, I hope I get to work with this person again? Or, oh, you know, I just circle the day when I get
Adam Driver.
Okay.
Such a great, wonderful actor. Glenn Powell.
Okay.
He's so funny and personable and talented. He's all the things, he really is. He's fantastic. Okay.
What is the first thing you look for on a call sheet?
The call time. But, by the time the call sheet comes out, I've seen it 100 times. I usually look at what the special equipment is and what the call times are, who the first man in is. I order all the special equipment generally. And so I just want to make sure that it's, on the call sheet. So, and the operators that are there to operate the special equipment are on the call sheet, and I know what their call times are, and I can translate that information. Every day is different. So it sort of depends on what the concern of the day is. If we're on stage, it's one thing. If we're out in the location, it's a different thing.
All right. So that begs the question, what is the last thing you want to see on a call sheet?
Usually, by the time Friday rolls around and you have gotten into splits, you start to see that like 3 p.m. call time. And you're like, oh boy, that means I'm going to be working until 3 a.m. I mean, look, I have to admit that because of my position, I don't have to work till 3 a.m. anymore because I'm not needed on the set at 3 a.m. So much of my job is done from an office that I can do it anywhere. I mean, while I know it's going to be painful for those people who do have to be there till 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5, 6, whatever, it's a whole thing. Because when you get into splits, my concern is that if we shoot a really long day and we've had a really long week, that I have safety concerns. I have to make sure that everybody is going to be okay to drive home. And I have to ask myself the question, do we need to get courtesy hotels for people? Are we going to need to concern ourselves with middle of the night coffee trucks? What about second meal? And, it's a whole different ball of wax when you have to do it at 3 or 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning than it is 1 in the afternoon.
All right. Now, what's the thing you love to see at craft services? I know I ask everybody, and for you, maybe not as much, but.
Again, I split my time. Mostly I'm in the office, but I do go out to set. I drink espresso, and I like in the office for there to be some type of espresso machine with a milk frother.
Okay.
So that's all I'm concerned about.
Okay, now what do you hate to see at craft services?
I think it's kind of nasty when there's food just like laid out on a table, and you're thinking to yourself like, ooh, that mayonnaise looks a little coagulated, but
Yep.
especially in the hot sun.
On location, yeah.
On it, so
no,
nasty.
Not pretty. Katrina, how do you define success?
Success is getting to a place where I can say no. And balance in my life that I have yet to achieve, where I have a better work-life balance. I am very much like a work person. When I turn it on, it's on. And I am now in my old age trying to find a better balance. And I think that is the best success I can have, is to have it all.
Okay, so then I always ask people, based on your definition, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty damn good. I didn't know anybody when I got to Hollywood. And now I get to work on, Top Gun and The Matrix. And I have this opportunity right now. Here I am in Australia. Like, what? How did that happen? I didn't know anybody in the movie business when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's that young girl who used to go through the TV guide and mark all the shows she wanted to watch and fight all of her siblings for control of the television, right?
Yeah.
To now work on iconic projects and to have found this niche, not only into something you were so passionate about, but to have made that your living. It's pretty impressive.
It's pretty exciting too. And I work in a very big business where it's a strange small town.
Yeah.
And we all know and love each other and take care of one another, and we have our little family feuds. I can't imagine doing anything else. I really can't. People always say like, oh, so if you won the lottery, would you like quit? And I just think to myself, no, but I might do something different. Like maybe, I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't coordinate, but I'd probably produce.
Would that be something you'd want to do? You'd want to produce?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. That's the goal.
And what kind, if I may, what kind of project?
I say smaller, but when I say smaller, I mean where the scope of the movie is less about the toys and the bots and the superheroes, and more about the stories of the people. And Jojo Rabbit last year was just brilliant, so creative and so heartwarming and heartbreaking. It's just, that's the type of movie I'd like to make, And I look at other movies over the years that have influenced me, and I mentioned a couple of them, Wall Street and even Top Gun. I don't know if I'd necessarily like to produce those movies, though I can see how some of my talents and what I've done in the past would lend itself towards that, because again, with the problem solving, and those big movies come with bigger problems and bigger responsibilities as well. But what I like to watch and what I would see myself being really passionate about are movies that are more geared towards the intimate relationships between people, what it means to tell a very specific story about a very specific place, and yet you're telling the story about everything and everybody, because the more specific you get, the more it is relatable. And that's what I love. And you watch a movie, it opens your eyes to a different part of the world, a different time and space. I do love limited series get to really deep dive into story, and I think that I would go down that route as well. I think it's fascinating to be able to tell a much larger scope of a story and just get into like the different characters. Whereas when you have just 2 hours to tell a story or an hour and a half to tell a story with a movie, you just really are focusing on maybe one major storyline and one sort of sub storyline. So it's great to be able to see these limited series and really deep dive into them. I do like some of the work that's being done where they take a theme and then they show from season to season how that theme develops, like Narcos or The Crown, or even Ryan Murphy has an interesting take. He'll find a theme and then he'll just go with that theme from season to season to season. I think that's fascinating as well.
As a writer, I believe that there are archetypes and that there is a universal nature to experience and life. We all yearn for many of the same things. So when you were talking, watching your eyes light up, that resonated with me, is because the projects I try to make are characters that sit in a specific time, place, or experience and are trying to achieve something in their life. But many of those struggles are universal. And I think we can take people on this, this visceral experience, and a lot of times share a different life than maybe one has experienced, but transport people into that and share the portions of that are universal and connective for kind of our greater consciousness. That's my realm.
You want to know what the next level is?
Yeah, okay.
VR.
Yeah, I've worked with
reality.
VR. I worked for a huge company. We used to do big events, and we designed a 3D interactive VR experience to teach lessons to people in the audience while transporting them through a story. And for me, I have been a fan of VR really since its early inceptions. In the 80s, I had opportunities to interact with early onset VR. And so I've kind of kept dabbling in that field. And I have so many ideas for original content in that realm, but also for crossover content. I think the cross integration, I think, is the future of kind of our medium, is to be able to take something, have you experience something, connect to a storyline or a period or an IP, and then for you to be able to step into that in a whole new way.
Oh yeah. Did you go to LACMA and see the Inaratu VR experience?
I didn't.
It's about people crossing the border from Mexico into the United States and what that experience is like if you get caught by Border Patrol. And so you are in it in the moment in which Border Control puts their gun, like trains their gun on you, and it's a VR experience, so you're feeling it. The avatars are like running all over. The most amazing thing is that if you put your face into the avatar, you could hear its heartbeat.
Oh, wow.
It was so beautiful. It was visceral, and that type of learning experience. I mean, yeah, sure, when you're watching a movie, it can be a visceral experience, but to feel like you're literally in it, I mean, it can, in terms of an educational tool, can you imagine? And even when you think about a VR experience, the way you remember it is so different than the way you remember a film. No matter how many times you've seen the film, it's not the same type of memory. To be in and to be able to see like a whole world around you that's completely imaginary, or very similar to our own world, except that you would never have been in this experience, except in the virtual world.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating. Imagine going to a place where education is something that someone can't get, and then and then be able to transport a person into a totally different time and space, or even just to, another country that exists in this time and space, but they wouldn't be able to go there otherwise.
I used to work on a tactical team. I worked fugitive recovery in between my, I know.
Seriously, what have you not done?
I've had a bizarre life, but we used to use these training simulators, and they took real weapons and replaced them with sensors and lasers, and you were in tactical environments. And urban tactical environments, right? And you go through these scenarios. That training was so much better than even sometimes the physically doing it. You could interact in a way with greater risk, but it was more threatening in a way and more unnerving, I would say, because they would set up scenarios that were no-win scenarios. I took my kids to a very toned-down version of that to have them experience, because I wanted to give them knowledge and awareness when they became young adults, because both my kids are adults now, to have perceptual awareness, to understand scenarios, especially, if there was some kind of attack, if you're in a place. And then we started training active shooter in educational environments. It's so clear why people have PTSD to a point that they can't put into words. And my daughter did a really super basic one with me. She still, to this day, remembers that experience so viscerally, because she didn't save me in this scenario. She didn't assess a threat, and she didn't see the outcome. There was no experience of that portion, because I didn't want that to be something that caused some kind of impact. But I just remember she was like, I didn't do the things I should have done of situational awareness. Right? And so the scenario stopped, and they just said, you didn't manage all of these things. It touches you in a very different way. And it's amazing. There's a company down.
Talk about an empathy builder.
Oh yeah.
In terms of VR, because you can create this immense experience in terms of storytelling, and because the choose your own adventure nature of VR, as the person in the immersive experience, you get to decide if you go right or left. And so in creating that VR experience, you really just have to encapsulate a small part of the world.
My writing partner and I, we have some layouts for certain content that allows the virtual space to maintain your space, but give you the thematic feel of being open source.
Oh yeah, okay.
Because we're leading you through a story where it's pick your own adventure, but through perceptive narrowing, you can narrow back.
Oh yeah.
Lead it back to an open source. So
it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I love it.
We're really getting there. So
okay.
We'll see.
What's one thing you want to see on every single set?
efficiency. I joked efficiency, but that you get in, you get out, you do the job, everybody gets along, and you get what you intended to get in terms of the day's plan is fulfilled. That's what I want to see on a set.
Okay, if you could eliminate one thing from a set, what would it be?
Finger pointing.
Perfect.
Blame when the sky does fall. Instead of like figuring out, like for me, I'm like, let's just figure it out.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whose mistake it is now, right? We'll talk about that.
Today it's my fault, tomorrow it's your fault. So what? Let's just fix it.
Now, what are we going to do? How do we save today? How do we make sure that we get most or all of what we need today out of today? That's one. And
sometimes mistakes are good mistakes.
Yeah, they make beautiful accidents.
The roof getting blown off the guard shack. Great mistake.
Beautiful moments.
When you see it, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, that's what she was talking about.
All right. What is the best gift you've gotten from a project or production?
Oh, you mean like a wrap gift?
No, just gift. I didn't define it. I leave that open-ended for you.
I'm so literal.
No, actually, you were very subtle. You are. I can see how smart and detail-oriented you are, because you ask leading setup questions to clarify, and you do them really subtly.
Just the next job. I've gotten some good gifts for sure over the years, literal gifts. I've gone to some pretty cool places. I've gone to some really not good places as well.
Yeah.
The best gift is the relationships I've built over time.
All right. How do you want the people that you've worked with to remember you?
I'm a hard worker, that I am anticipatory, and that I get the job done. And that while we're doing it, we have a laugh. I like to laugh when I'm at work.
Okay, final question. What is the legacy that you want your loved ones to take from your life?
Oh my gosh, legacy. So funny. I used to think about legacy when I was a kid. I don't think about that much anymore, because it's less about where I'm going to end up and more about how I'm getting there. I suppose that's it. The legacy is that a life well lived. Enjoy the adventure, right? Being in the adventure. Yeah. And, I don't know where it's going to go. I really don't. Like, people say, oh, let's make this big plan to like do this thing 2 years from now. And I'm like, I don't know where I'll be in 6 months. Right. Like, and there's a beautiful part of the not knowing, and you just have to love the adventure, because you're going to go on this ride, and there will be things that you never planned for that will be some of the best things that ever happened to you, if you're not fighting them the whole time. I love that's one of the things I learned from this business is life is the adventure that you go on, and I kind of like that we don't know what comes next. I guess some of the terminology of the day is leaning in to it. But really what that means is that you said, stop fighting it. And it is truly about an acceptance of where you are and not where you want to be. That striving that people do constantly of like, oh, this isn't good enough. I have to be there in order to be happy. Good luck. Yeah. I don't know when you're going to be happy if it's always outside of you, I don't remember when it was. It was, I think, when I first got to LA. It was, this camera assistant that I never worked with him. I met him at a bar, and we became friends. We're still friends to this day. And he said to me, he's like, okay, this is what I'm going to tell you about Hollywood. This is the advice I give everybody who just moved here. I was like, oh, okay, what is it? He's like, keep your overhead low. I'm like, oh, that's the big plan. And he said, well, because you always want to be able to move. And if you got like a big mortgage and like a big like life that you have to, constantly, lots of bills and he's like, I'm telling you, keep your overhead low. You'll always be able to have all the choices. He's like, don't let the outside stuff bog you down. And in a way, it's a bigger idea as well. Like, keep it simple. You know, usually the simplest answer is the best answer. You know, what is it? Occam's razor?
Katrina Elder, this was like, it was beautiful. It was beautiful to watch your excitement, your enthusiasm, your passion while you're curing all of the problems and solving the chaos that is production.
I have a huge team, by the way, that helps me do it. I work for some incredible people, incredible problem solvers that I have learned from. I mean, right now, my boss right now, he is so fantastic. He is legit like one of the smartest people I have ever worked with or met. I love watching him solve problems. There's nothing too big for him. He's fascinating. And I love it. I love working around people like that. I hope someday that somebody says to me like, oh, you know, she's a real go-getter, and she like, you know, she never lets anybody say no to her. She's go and get it done, you know.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing what you
Absolutely.
do and sharing yourself with me and the audience. And hopefully somewhere down the road, we get to work on a production together, and maybe one
cool.
that you produce with a story that resonates with your heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. This is really enjoyable.
If you liked what you saw, or maybe you want to know more about the entertainment industry, check out some of our other episodes where we dive into other departments as I celebrate all the amazing people who make production possible. If you'd like to be updated on Fish's Call Sheet, go ahead and subscribe or hit the bell below so you know right when we update new information.